Siete stati più puntuali di noi, quindi mi sembra giusto, ringraziandovi per questa gentilezza, riprendere con precisione gli orari e essere anche sintetici noi che introduciamo le relazioni, in modo da cercare di salvarci un quarto d'ora finale di discussione. Quindi riprendiamo i nostri lavori. Oggi pomeriggio ci immergeremo nella dimensione sonora, come dire, di mondi con i quali abbiamo forse una maggiore confidenza e dimestichezza, un po' una comfort zone per i paesaggisti, ma mondi sui quali abbiamo anche in questo mestiere delle responsabilità rispetto alla loro cura, alle trasformazioni e agli interventi forse più immediatamente applicabili a una professione, una delle tante peraltro che segue queste giornate. Quindi iniziamo questo viaggio che sarà attraverso foreste, spazi pubblici urbani e giardini, e iniziamo proprio con le foreste, la cui dimensione sonora è al centro dell'intervento di Giornate, che ringrazio veramente di cuore per essere arrivato qui da Parigi. Jérôme è stato già nominato varie volte in questa stanza, fra ieri soprattutto. È professore di ecologia al Museo Nazionale di Storia Naturale di Parigi e dirige un gruppo di ricerca dedicato proprio all'ecoacustica, che insomma Almo Farina ci ha spiegato bene che spazio ha e di cosa tratta. La sua relazione si intitola Suono, silenzio, rumore e musica in una foresta. Volevo solo aggiungere, scusate, che Jérôme, autore di moltissimi lavori di ricerca, ma anche di 2 libri molto belli che hanno ispirato queste giornate di studio, al momento disponibili solo in francese, Les Sons de la Terre e Histoire naturelle du silence, che però sarà tradotto a breve in italiano. Prego.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the Foundation for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and as it has been said, it was so interesting to listen to the other talks, which were really open-minding and inspiring. So it was really good to listen to people which are not exactly in the same discipline. So I will talk about sound, silence, noise, and music. I think I have all the keywords of this today conference, except music that has not been defined, but I will not try to define music. We go too far away. So I am alone to speak today, but actually we are a team of researcher, postdoc, PhD student, and master students. We are between 12 and 18 people, depending on the season of the university. And so our group is called EAR, for Eco-Acoustic Research. As Almo already introduced it, but maybe I can repeat it in a different, slightly different way. Ecoacoustics is just a rather recent discipline. It's now 10 years old. From natural environments, mostly natural environments like forests, you have sounds emanating from them that you can record and then analyze with different signal or statistical or artificial intelligence tools, so that you can get data to address questions, of course, in ecology, in animal behavior, as well in biological conservation. But we try also to get into more distant disciplines like psychoacoustics and musicology, so that we try to have a multidisciplinary and, if possible, interdisciplinary approach. So when you explore a natural environment, you can have an aesthetic approach, like it is done in art. And if you refer to images, you can take very nice pictures, as this picture of lynxes by Vincent Munier, who is a famous photographer, a wildlife photographer in France. And at the same time, that's what we mostly do, but not only, you can take a picture of the same animal, but in a very different way, with this scientific approach with camera trap, where on the left at the art side, you are facing the lynx. Here we only have the tail of the lynx almost, but it's still a very important information in terms of conservation. So what we do is that we try to combine art and science to study mostly the soundscape of forest. And if you transfer that to sounds, you can have an aesthetic approach by recording the soundscape in a similar way than you would take pictures by putting your microphone in a specific direction at a specific time, so that you take pictures, sound pictures of a specific site. And here in science, we do not do the same, but we collect data, or capta, as I've learned yesterday, with this automatic recorder. So that's the original green version of this audio recorders that has been introduced this morning. And so we collect automatically data without any aesthetic effort, but to try to address ecological questions. So just to introduce, this talk would be a kind of case study. So I will not go through large ideas or theories in ecoacoustics or soundscape analysis, but try to go in the field, in a forest, in a single forest. This forest is called the Rizu forest. We are in the center east of France, close to the Swiss border. So we talked already a lot about Switzerland, so we're very close to Switzerland. It's a rather small forest, actually. It's 3,300 hectares. It's a highly protected forest. It's part of the natural park. It's part of a Natura 2000 zone, and there are other conservation tools to try to protect the biodiversity that you can find in this forest. But this forest, some images of this biodiversity with a set of charismatic species that you can find over there. The wood grows, I will talk a bit more about it later. The hazel grows, the three-toed woodpecker, a very rare woodpecker species, a mountain owl, the boreal owl, very rare as well. Much more common the red deer, but as well the wolf and the lynx. So we have a very nice biodiversity, but it's highly threatened as well. So first, due by the use of this forest by human in terms of recreation, so you can ski in this forest, you can walk, you can go to collect mushrooms. So there are quite a lot of human activity. The trees are cut, there is some logging, among others, to build music instruments, so the connection with music could be there as well. But the most important one, and which is really frightening, I would say, is climate change. And you see, really, we see now that the trees are drying just on site. And you see on that picture that I just took here last October, plenty of trees that are gray. They are just dying up. So the idea was to monitor this forest in an acoustic way to estimate the change of its soundscape according to years. So the program is planned to work for 15 years, and if we can go further, we will do it. So we settle for audio recorded in the forest in this green area. So you have a map of the forest. The green area corresponds to the center of the forest where there is a single tree species, the spruce tree. And we set up these recorders to be equally spaced and to have a good representativeness of the soundscapes of this forest. So at each point, you have one of these autonomous audio recorder that we program to record 1 minute, then stop for 14 minutes, and do that 7 days a week, 24 hours for each site, so that we collect every year more than 140,000 files and more than 2,300 hours of recordings. that, of course, we cannot listen to. And this is coupled with weather sensors about the temperature, the relative humidity, the solar irradiation, and also a camera trap that takes regular pictures to have information about the snow level and also about the plant phenology, if plants are blooming or not. And the audio recorder is equipped with a 12-volt battery so that we can limit the access to the forest. We don't want to disturb the forest, so we only go 2 or 3 times a year to do the maintenance of the equipment. First, we analyze the main acoustic properties of the forest by doing some propagation experiments of the sound. Here you have the recorder plus a sound level meter and a loudspeaker that was broadcasting a white noise at different distances from the recorder so that we can estimate how much the sound travels through the forest. And here you have one of the results that shows you that according to the distance, the frequency propagates in a different way. The frequencies that propagate the most are between 5 and 2.5 kilohertz. So that's something that should be taken into account in the further analysis. So what about the soundscapes of this forest? I will play a time lapse, as we could listen this morning, a time lapse of a single day. We start at midnight and we have only 2 seconds per hour to do it quite quickly. It's 48 seconds. So midnight and we go around the clock. I'll let you listen to and try to identify the sounds. So basically, I don't know if you could identify the different sources, but we have birds, we have insects. There might not be any in this time lapse, and there could be also mammals, not in that case, but the lynx, for instance, can produce some sound. So that's what is called the biophony. And we have also rain and wind. I think that was quite clear. So it's called the geophony. And then, I don't know if you could hear, but there were quite a lot of aircrafts, actually. So it's the technophony, the sound or noise produced by our machines. So the first idea was to try to describe these soundscapes in a quite rough way to estimate the different level of 5 sound categories. The aircraft noise, so in part of the technophony, the wind, the rain, so the 2 of them part of the geophony, the biophony, so mainly the birds. And then what we have named at this time the silence, that's something that we could not listen to anything, we could not see anything on the spectrographic visualization. To do that, we use a low-cost AI system, a perceptron. It's a very simple neural network, and it worked well. So it was done by Ellie Greenfeder, who now is a PhD student in the lab. And for the first year of recording, we could estimate that in all the files that we collected during that year, 75% of these files, in 75% of these files, there was at least one aircraft. So the dominating sound is aircraft in this forest. Then comes biophony, 40%. Then wind and rain. You see that it's not a very nice place. It's quite windy and rainy. And then the remainder is silence with 12%. If we go into more details and look at the distribution of these sound classes according to the time of the year, months, it started in August because we started our experiment in August. You see that the aircraft is almost, the distribution of aircraft noise is almost flat during all the year. You almost have aircraft all the time. For the biophony, we find a profile, a time profile that was expected with the lowest value in the middle of the winter in January, and then the level of biophony increases during the spring, summer, and then decrease at the end of summer and during the fall. And then the silence is almost flat. You have almost no silence during all the year. If we look at this time profile, but according to the time of the day. So here you have a plot from 1 in the morning to midnight. For the aircraft, you see that the lowest activity is observed at 3 or 4 in the morning. But still, at this time, there are a quarter of the flights with aircraft. And then it increases. We wake up and maybe we take a plane to go away from Geneva, which is very close to the site. And then it can reach up to 95% of the file with an aircraft. When you look at the biophony, you see that actually we have almost the same profile. The birds wake up as we do. They are mostly diurnal birds, which are the most important part of biophony, and then decreases at the end of the day. And the silence is the opposite profile. You have silence when you have neither aircraft nor biophony. So which is important is to notice that this aircraft noise and the biophony actually have similar profiles, so that you have noise when you have sounds coming from animals. And we know by the literature, by other studies, that this aircraft noise impacts the life of these living beings. It impacts their physiology, their behavior, their ecology. So just to insist a bit on that, here you have a map of the flight path over the forest. The forest is here with a blue dot. And this is a map for a single day. Okay, so I could get the information from the ministry, and over a year there were more than 118,000 aircraft passed over the forest. So at the end we have a very nice protected landscape, but which is localized in an unprotected and polluted soundscape. So a kind of discrepancy between the landscape and actually the soundscape. So the idea is to go a bit more in details of these sounds of the forest. Sylvain Hopper, who is an engineer in the lab, developed a way to quantify the biophonic sounds to build a kind of acoustic index, as Almo mentioned already. So it's based on the image. It's quite paradoxal, but we almost always transform the sound into an image. And here are the results of this computation of this acoustic index over a year. So we have a heat map, exactly like this morning with a glacier. We have a heat map for the complete year. So it starts here from midnight to midnight. And the first row is the first week of the year, so the beginning of January, and the last is the end of December. And you see that we can see a clear pattern of activity, of acoustic activity, of the biophony that corresponds to the sunrise and sunfall and the springtime. So we will compute these heat maps over years to see if there are shifts according, in particular, to the climate change. So we can go a bit deeper into through the ecological scale and have a look or listen to acoustic communities, that is sounds produced by a single group of animals, but several species, like birds that produce a chorus in the morning. We can listen to one of these choruses in the forest. Oops. If I can. So you see it's very nice. It's plenty of birds. It's quite difficult actually to identify the species that are singing in this mix of birds. So we use the same index as Sylvain developed to monitor the bird activity. Here you have a profile of the bird activity according to the time of the day from noon noon. This is the green line, and you see that there is a peak of activity just before sunfall. Then almost nothing happens during the night, and you have a peak of activity when sunrise. This is the dawn chorus. This can be linked to the temperature of the forest, to the sun activity as well, and that's things that we will use to see if there are shifts again according to year, to see if the activity of the birds changes according to the climate change, to the local weather conditions. We also work on the other acoustic communities in open meadows inside the forest. You have these meadows with this plant that you might know, this alpine plant, which is, I could not find the English name, is a yellow gentian. You know that you produce alcohol with that. And here we recorded 10 of these forest meadows, which are inhabited mainly by insects or Soptera, that means grasshopper and bush crickets. So I will play a sound of this acoustic community that was recorded with another audio recorder. The sound is totally different from what we could hear with the birds. In that case, the insect, by stridulation, produce sounds that are quite rhythmic. They occupy different frequency bands, but their signature is based mostly on temporal patterns. So what did Nathan Linné, who was a master student last year, he developed a signal analysis process to count the number of different rhythms in this mix of sounds, so that he ended up with another acoustic index that he named N tempi, which is related to the acoustic richness that we record with the autonomous recorders. And so then you can track the acoustic activity inside these open meadows. Here you have the results for 5 sites from midnight to midnight, and so we are analyzing these profiles to see the relation with the size of the open meadows, with the distance with other open meadows, with the local microclimate conditions. But we can monitor the activity of these insect communities in a total automatic way. We can go even deeper in terms of ecology at the population level. Here I have no results to show you yet because the analyses are under work, but we aimed at monitoring this specific bird, which is highly endangered, the wood grouse. I don't know if you know it, but it was highly hunted in France before. The population in the Rizou forest is really declining. We don't know how many individuals there are, but it's like between 10 and 20. So it's really nothing in terms of genetics. So the idea is to try to have a good estimation of this population. It's very difficult to observe them. You do not have to disturb them. So the ecoacoustic approach appears as a good solution because you can put the recorders during the summer when they do not reproduce, and then you record them during the year without disturbing them. Just to play one of these sounds because it's very particular. Oops. Very strange sound that we are working on to automatically identify it. And we do the same with the boreal owl. You see that the sound is very different. It's almost one frequency band, very distant away from the recorder, so quite difficult to identify. And Félix Michaud, a PhD student in the lab, is developing an AI system to automatically monitor these owls. So you can hear that the sound is not nice, actually. It's not an aesthetic recording. It's just, but it includes the information of the presence of this bird. We also track ecological functions. An ecological function, and to introduce it, I think that the best way is to talk about pollination. I guess you all know what pollination is and how important it is in the environment today. Pollination is mostly ensured by flying insects, and when insects fly, they produce sound, a buzz sound. So we can listen here. Yeah, it's very active. It's not always like this, but you have a sound that you can detect potentially. Another ecological function is related to the woodpecker. Woodpecker, we have different species in the forest. The woodpecker, drill holes in the tree trunks, and they eat insects that this can destroy the trees. In these holes they can nest, and other species can also nest. So they are very good ecological indicators of the state of the forest. So the drum, here's an example of woodpecker drumming. A very nice recording done by Marc Namblard. And so the idea was to detect these two sounds that give an indication of two ecological functions. So in that case, I say we, but it's Alexandre Folio, former master student. We developed an AI system based on convolutional neural networks, a bit more complex, but it could estimate when these two sounds were in the forest. So here you have from August to July on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you have the time of the day from midnight to midnight, actually, and the lines indicate the sunrise and the sunfall. And you can see the activity of this flying insect potentially pollinating flowers. And you see that their activity is quite late in the year, from June to end of September, beginning of October, just after sunrise and before sunfall. And here we have the image of the activity of the woodpeckers that are mostly active in March, just after sunrise. So again, we'll produce these pictures over years to see if there are shifts according to climate change. If we go into more details of these results, here is for the buzzing sound, so the pollination, the activity of this sound according to the temperature. And you see that most of the activity occurs around 20 degrees. And in gray, you have actually the available temperature of the forest. And you see that there is a kind of discrepancy. The blue histogram is skewed on the right. So that means that actually it's a cold forest for these insects. And if the temperature increases, this might actually be a benefit for these flying insects. But if you look at the woodpeckers, in that case, you see that the two distributions totally overlap. That means these birds are very well in that forest. This is a good, cool, and cold conditions. But if the temperature increases, this might impact the population of these birds. So it's a very simple way to see that. It's, of course, much more complex than that, but with ecoacoustic, we can have some information about this climate ecology, I would say, of these two ecological functions. So now, to do the link with the music in this forest, actually, Adèle de Baudin was finishing a PhD right now, had the challenge to do a connection between ecoacoustics and music, and electroacoustic music, which is a kind of music genre that uses machines, actually techniques, to get sounds and then to broadcast the sound. So basically microphones and loudspeakers. And in this music, there is no music score, okay, because it's not usual music. And in ecoacoustics, we also have the challenge of visualization of very long recordings over a long time, possibly years. So the idea was to try to find one or several solutions to visualize natural soundscape, and electroacoustic soundscape. So she did that. I do not go into the details of the process, but with this kind of representation, circular representation, here you have the 1 day of recording, a bit like the time lapse I played back, and the colors represent sounds that are closely related in terms of frequency profile, frequency spectra. It's all automated. You do not need to do anything. You just feed the system with the recordings and plot the circular plot. So here in blue, you have the night, which is clustered. Then in the morning, in orange, and in the evening, you have actually the dawn and dusk races. And then you have the soundscape of the day. So you have plenty of information in a single plot. Here is another plot. It's called a chord diagram plot, a soundscape chord diagram. Here it's over a complete year, always at the same time of the day, at 6 a.m., early in the morning. The 1st of January is here, and then you go around the year, and you see that it highlights actually the chorus of the bird in the morning, so that we can estimate when it started during the year and when it finishes. And the good thing is that she could apply the technique to electroacoustic composition. For instance, with this music piece, Presque Rien, by Luc Ferrari, who was an electroacoustic composer, and who designed this piece in 3 parts. He described it as in 3 parts, and when you applied the soundscape chord diagram, you found these 3 parts automatically. It does not always work, but in that case, it worked pretty well. So, and Adele also tried to make connections between what we do in ecoacoustics and what she can do in music for a large audience. So she created a sound installation that is based on sound visualization, but also a sound restitution with a playback of the data that we collect with our automatic recorders, like here with this sound representation, which highlight the different sound sources, a bush cricket, the bird, and the plane, and the audience can play with these sounds and interact with these sounds, changing the images and the sound sources. She also composed music pieces with recordings that she did in an aesthetic way in the field, in particular with hydrophones, collecting sounds in a river or ponds or lakes. And this is one of a sample of composition, and that she combined with some visualization tools. Maybe we can take the time to listen to these pieces, which is named Ecotone Aquatic. And you will see that it's quite far away from reality. She took the liberty to change the sound, to speed them up, or change the frequency and so on. Maybe we can turn the light a bit down, if possible. So the last part of our project is dedicated to education, high-level education, because we are in connection with a Master of Bioacoustics, which is organized by the University of Saint-Etienne, the center of France. And then we helped master students to we teach actually to master students how to record soundscapes and how to analyze these soundscapes in the field, in the forest, so that we have tried to have a complete activity, complementary activity on this project in this forest. But this is actually a single forest. Is it representative of all the forests in France? That's another question. So that the idea now is to scale up and to switch from a single forest to 101 forest. So that the project that we are starting right now, actually, it's named Sono Silva. It's funded by the Office Français de la Biodiversité. And so we selected 101 forests in protected areas, a bit like the Rizou forest. And we address the same questions about the level of acoustic pollution, of technophony in this forest, the activity of the birds. And this also is the occasion to promote the listening of natural soundscape. So that's a new project that covers the complete mainland territory of France, and it's headed by Ludovic Crochard. So just to finish a bit of this promotion slide, sorry, but it was already done. But I did not talk that much about silence. We talked a lot about it. So I wrote a book about silence with a naturalist perspective. So what is the role of silence for animal behavior, animal ecology, and potentially for human beings as well. So this book will be translated in English soon and in Italian a bit later, but it's on its way. And I would like just to extract one sentence. I take the liberty to extract this sentence because it's not mine. I think it's a good summary of maybe the definition that we could find about silence, sound, and noise. Silence is a sound that does not make any noise. And this definition actually was found by a 6-year-old kindergarten child. I think this is the best definition that we can have for these three concepts. So I would like to finish on that definition found by a child. So thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie Jérôme, grazie mille. Abbiamo visto anche l'imminente pubblicazione, quindi abbiamo tutte le coordinate anche dell'editore italiano Nottetempo che farà la tua storia naturale del silenzio. Io devo passare subito al prossimo contributo che introduce un altro aspetto che è quello della progettazione paesaggistica, nel senso forse più chiaro, ecco, quindi qualcosa che ha a che fare con l'intervento dell'uomo sulla modellazione, no, del suolo rispetto a un concetto di progetto, un'idea di progetto che si misura poi con il suono. Quindi il nostro relatore è un architetto paesaggista svedese, Frans Gilberg, e il titolo del suo intervento è Starfield Simulation, progetti di arte sonora, site specifiche nel parco di Scania. Scania è un parco sulla costa della città di Malmo, nel sud della Svezia. Frans è architetto del paesaggio con base a Malmo, collabora con lo studio Lilival per la progettazione indipendente di parchi, scuole, abitazioni, progetti culturali e pianificazione urbana. In precedenza ha collaborato con lo studio Topotech di Berlino per concorsi di architettura e installazioni. La sua formazione è umanistica, critica e scientifica, attivo in precedenza come progettista e curatore d'arte sonora e musica elettronica. Fra i lavori recenti il parco di Torparingen, nominato per il premio internazionale di paesaggio Lenzin, il restauro di Malmgarten, nominato per il Malmo City Building Prize in collaborazione con Restaurera, il parcheggio Gustav Adolf, nominato per il premio d'architettura di Vaxio. 2 pubblicazioni segnalate recentemente, la monografia Malmgarten, penso sia i giardini di Malmo, e Starfield Simulation, che è il progetto che ci mostrerà Franz. Grazie per il tuo contributo e per portare, diciamo, a Treviso un tocco di mentalità e di progettualità scandinava che ci mancava da un po' di tempo, con la quale però abbiamo una certa consuetudine. A te, grazie.
Thank you very much, Luigi. Like you said, the Foundation has some historical connection to Swedish landscape architects. So it's an honor to be invited in this context. And what I'm going to speak about is not a research project. It's rather a very practical insight work and a curatorial work with music and sound art. So it's, in the end, the presentation will be much more of a performative one than an academic one. And I will try to articulate the possibilities of working with presenting sound in a context, and a very special context in this case, but how to actually use the possibilities of sound art to create a new deep listening experience, or to have an enlightened experience of the landscape and of listening as such. So the name of this retrospective exhibition was Incomplete Without Ambient Noise. So it's trying to really address the idea of relationship between the added sound and the existing sound. So far in these 2 days, we have spoken a lot about the soundscape, and actually mostly in terms of ecological listening. So what I will present is something entirely the opposite, and how to look on sound and how to experience and relate to the soundscape and its changes. So in doing that, I will follow more or less the layout of this tiny publication, and with recent photography made 2 years ago that presents the landscape and the site more or less like an architectural promenade of how you encounter it and how you discover it. And in parallel with that, I will try to develop an understanding of how I try to work or convey that understanding to you here today. So I will try and start with an epigraph that's quite fascinating, that was picked up by Alan S. Weiss, in one of his studies on audio mimesis. So I will try to read this quote from Henry David Thoreau. On this cold day I hear memorable strains. What must the birds and the beasts think where it passes through the woods? It intoxicates me. Orpheus is still alive. All poetry and mythology revive. It is the most glorious music I have ever heard. The very fine, clear tones seem to come from the very core and plinth of this telegraph pole. I know not, but it is my own chords that tremble so divinely. There are baritones and high, sharp notes. Some come sweepingly from further along the wire. The latent music of the earth had here found a vent, music aeolian. I do not know, but this will make me read the Greek poets. Thus, as ever, the finest uses of things are accidental. Mr. Morse did not invent this music. And what is fascinating here, obviously, is that quote is from 1852, from his journals. And Thoreau was one of the American transcendentalists who tried to be really attuned to the surrounding nature, as we know, and being very open to changes and almost a Eastern influenced perspective on perception. So, and he was also quoted by John Cage, which in the end was the first person who articulated the idea of aesthetic listening to sounds and soundscape, and not talking about noise, but rather just experiencing sound in a musical listening mode. But obviously, it was really evident with Thoreau, who was also inspired by German Romanticism of the same century, to be open and attuned to what we actually can experience. And speaking of silence, then obviously he was in a wooden area, but he was not confronted by this sound, but really experienced it as a quality. So that is actually what Cage is saying, that silence is not doesn't exist, as we know, but it's an intention. It's an active gesture of acquiring and listening to the situation. So to apply a musical understanding of sound is the other way of listening, basically, to the context and the soundscape. And this Aeolian music, this Aeolian harp, maybe some of you already know it, but it's an instrument that was basically a zither with brass strings that were put in motion by the wind. And this instrument was known since the antiques, but became the outdoor instrument of all the dreams during the Romantic period, and in garden design during the 7th and 18th century. So very alike the quote from Thoreau. Samuel Coleridge, the poet, was speaking of the sound, the sweeping sound, as it was played by the gods, like by an intellectual breeze, which is a kind of fascinating quote. And of course, that was the idea and the name of the Greek god of winds. And why I'm talking about, the reason why I'm talking about this is that the park itself has hidden speakers, and curiously somehow is related to this notion of sound being translated, because the sound is experienced as a part of the site, not really as, I mean, obviously it's added, you understand somehow that it's added, but at the same time it appears like it's coming out of the site of the natural landscape. So it's in a way like the inverse of the Aeolian harp, but at the same time bringing up the notion of listening practices, basically corresponding between landscape and music. And this is the presentation outline. And as you see, the photography is now approaching the mound, and we see the open horizon of Öresund. And I will soon show you the actual location on a map. So the first part, I will make a little bit more introduction of my background to convey some of the reasons and objectivity, the objectives of this work. And we will, for the second part, look at the site history and understand the site itself. And part 3 is a swift in-depth dive into those project typologies that were carried out. And this is just my background, and I wanted to show that just to inform that I started out as an experimental musician and studying critical theory and science theory and art history, etc. But had a very interesting experience at the Woodland Cemetery in Stockholm in an early age, which actually informed me on the gesture of silence and the architecture of silence that made me interested in landscape architecture. So basically, what I experienced there was that you can actually create a site of large interest, of existential value, and that actually informs you to relate to the site in terms of silence and reverence. So that was, for me, a very formative experience and a choice of looking into landscape architecture. So that carried on for a while, and during my studies and before my studies, I was producing electronic music made from a lot from just field recordings, like the ones we heard today, and trying to create a deeper listening situation to a topographical movement of sounds, in a way like architecture. You would move through spaces and with a certain rhythm and with a certain observation of materiality and timber. So, and to me that informed me also in the way of working as a landscape architect, in terms of temporal movements and spatial movements. So for me, those two practices are very intertwined. So the name Starfield Simulation might seem odd. I want to just give you a hint on that. And the idea is that since we work at the time, computer music was at its peak during the early 2000s. And the simple simulation of a star field had this kind of potential of being a simulation that you immediately believes, and you're sort of informed on the discrepancy between this simulation or simulacra and reality, and somehow you learn from something in that difference, in that discrepancy. So as a kind of a modus for the whole project is to work with this kind of border between representation and falsification in the end, just to find a deeper understanding of things, reaching a kind of silence, if you like. I will come back to that. So if we look at the project overview, we started in 2000, and together with the Center for Contemporary Art, we did some 30 concerts with contemporary sound artists and electronic music performers. In 2002, we started performing in the park, and that developed into temporary sound installations and into a contribution to this permanent sound feed in the park. And in 2021, we did this retrospective and a little book, as you've seen. And actually, this year we are working on a new sound feed for the permanent installation. So I will show you more on that. So I will try to define the project. So in terms of what we did, I did there in this site, the park was an existing structure from the 90s, and was added with speakers in the late 90s, just basically playing beach music. So the intention of the municipality was to entertain the beach visitors, basically. And the discovery I did was that this site had much more potential for sound art and for music that would sort of enlighten or open up new interpretations of landscape and of music as such. So I started this series of interventions in 2002. And gradually that became an integrated part of my landscape architecture practice. But and due to that, it also developed in a more of a methodological way. So there are three types of interventions. The one first was the sound feed that runs during the whole day and night, so you can always come there and listen. And secondly, we did musical performances with performers basically in the site. And lastly, inviting international sound artists to perform or to create a unique site-specific sound art piece that was presented during a month each summer. And my background makes this into really an experimental objective in the end. So there's no, it's not a research project, but really exploring the possibilities of experienced music and sound art in relation to this landscape. And also as a landscape architect, trying to understand what is site specificity and how, what actually is something already site specific, or is it becoming site specific when you put it there, and how does this process actually develop regarding different sound art pieces. Also, I think, going back to the experience of the Woodland Cemetery in Stockholm, it was also in a kind of search personally for me to find this kind of silence in respect of, in terms of being in resonance with the site itself and understanding the different dimensions of the site. So I will come back to that idea later on. But as the project develops, we had more of a kind of outlined objective that would be firstly then to investigate the site of the concept of site specificity, as mentioned already. Secondly, comparing the visual and auditory representations of landscape in the site. That means to experiment with how we experience the same landscape depending on what kind of music we present, for example. And thirdly, to really activate this public space for sound art and new forms of listening. So I will show you now the location of the park and you know the relationship between Malmö and Copenhagen. We have a sound, and recently a bridge were constructed. That was 20 years ago, more or less when we started the project. And looking at the really start of Malmö as an industrial city, you see the development in the late 19th century, and that developed into a completely new land shape. So what you see in this outer edge of the peninsula is the Scania Park, and it's the highest point in Malmö, more or less, because of the flat character of this part of Sweden. So it was an industrial city from an early stage, but so this whole landfill was made or constructed to give the industrial development new grounds for developing their factories, basically. But this era ended quickly in 1991, so the whole peninsula was basically empty. So instead, there was a big cultural transformation into a university city. And the whole area is now filled with new housing and parks, for example. So in 2001, there was a big exhibition. And you can see the development of the peninsula during the last 100 years. So if we look at the site, how it actually appeared in the 90s, it was basically an open landfill. And to understand a little bit of the characters of the site, I just pinned down a few characters. Of course, you have the open horizon, you have this terrain vague of new land that has no history and uncertain future as well. And you have the skyline of Copenhagen, you have the Bay Area, and the industrial heritage. And the park design itself was carried out in 1991 to connect the city again to the waterfront, because it was cut off for 100 years with the industrial expansions. So for the first time, Malmö had again a connection to the waterfront. And as such, the park was developed into a theme connecting to the horizon and connecting to this kind of new territory. So you would be able to move around the outer edge. The public would be able to do that, and the formal design of the park was basically formal shapes in grass and earth and shrubbery. And if you look closer to the mound, you can see this orthophoto from '98 that they just recently buried the speakers, the 4 speakers, in the mound. Of course, there's a set of connotations to the mound. It's very specific, and it's situated on the very edge of this peninsula. So when you reach that outer point, there's also an inner point. You can enter into this amphitheater, and you discover sound, music, or at this time, some kind of radio topology music. But you discover that at a very late moment, as you move several hundred meters or 1,000 meters just to get to that point. So the distance is a very important element in the experience. So you're really at the land's end, and it's a very physical experience at the time. And the parabolic shape, when you enter this shape, it's closing off the most close by area. So what the sounds that this parabolic shape is capturing actually is from more far off. So it already as a sculpture or as a land art feature, it has the kind of listening abilities. Also, it's framing the seascape, the landscape horizon, as a kind of theatrical stage, which became the sort of momentum of working with sound in this place. So there's a lot of correspondences in the shape. For example, it's interesting to just see the amphitheater connection, of course, with the ancient Greek amphitheater that would be relating to a large vista, at the same time presenting its content on a smaller stage within the theater. I'm not going further in those notations, but there is a set of connections to ancient ritual shapes, of course. So this is the section of the park, the particular element in the park. So it's 40-meter diameter, and it's set with 4 speakers. It's a double stereo, and in total 24 speakers. So you would have a quite impressive sound, even though it wouldn't be. It doesn't have the sub bass, but it has a extraordinary range in terms of perspective. And in plan, it would be apparent like this. So there is a ridge of 7 meters, and the base is 3 meters high. So it was, as I said, built in 91, then extended. And it's kind of an odd story, because as the quote, the epigraph I mentioned about the best uses of things are accidental, this is one of those occasions that this shape existed with one intention of just being an informal place to sit down. And some 8 years later, it was added with speakers, just as a kind of casual extension of the site. Not really exploited to its possibilities. But then, as we discovered it, the city was really open to letting us work with the site and to extend its possibilities. That brings us to the third part and the 3 type of projects. So I will try to convey the kind of goals or sort of aims that we had in programming this site with sound. So in the first typology, it was it's a permanent sound fit. So that would be the music that just plays there when you arrive and you discover the site, and you enter it and you hear something. So the first category of what we're trying to work with is the sort of listening in between the site soundscape and the added sound. So the relationship between added sound and the existing sound is important. And just to give it a kind of graphical representation, you see the sounds of the site are very is the dominant, more or less the dominant character, and then the added sound is just surfing on top of the the soundscape. And in the gaps, of course, between added sounds, you are able to experience the site itself, which by contrast becomes an experience. I mean sort of tactile almost. It's just a gesture of creating a gap between added sounds that makes the existing sounds appear to you as a listener in the same way as you're listening to the art pieces. So in a way, here you're experiencing. You have the possibility to experience this deep listening to the site by just adding gaps between added sound. So in my reading also, the French writer Michel Chion, who's a writer on film scoring, basically, he claims that silence is the negative of what we heard or imagined beforehand. And that's quite a reasonable explanation, because in this little gap, there is silence appearing. And all of a sudden, you can hear it. You can relate to that gap of silence. And then we also were working with adding different types of atmospheres in terms of atmospheric music. And we know, we haven't spoken about that these days, but atmosphere is, it can be atmospheric music, but it's also kind of the total experience of sound and visual and social aspects of a specific site. We all know it and we use this concept, but we use it in an intuitive way. There's a German philosopher, Gernot Böhme, who has dived into this topic, and he is really trying to making it into an aesthetic theory, which is interesting because that means that atmospherics can be articulated as a term, as a type of architecture, as a sort of architecture. he says that atmosphere is the between sight and human sensibilities. It's a contrastive and ingressive experience on subliminal level. But moving between atmospheres provokes the awareness of each state. So often it's like that. You're in a certain condition, but when you arrive to the next one, it becomes clear as a kind of it becomes clear in the changes between atmospheres. So what we try to do is just in the sound feed to create something of the type of music, for example, that you're expecting in relationship to a scenic landscape of the sea. There's a lot of, we have a large set of inherited narratives from mythology, literature, religion, etc., cinema, memory, and etc. So that really provokes you to hear music when you look at a certain landscape. It has a kind of soundtrack itself. But what we're trying to do here is to contrast different interpretations of this landscape image, and being able to introduce the listener to a movement between different interpretations to open up the listening perspective. And Michel Chion also talks about this topic as, in terms of film, as an empathetic or an unempathetic sound. That means that by adding sound that is contrastive to the expected emotion, you open up the interpretation of the kind of often mechanical interpretations that we do. So by doing contrasting sound scoring, the image of the landscape may reveal itself in a new way. And thirdly, okay, thank you. Then we will continue here. Okay. Also we discovered that sound became a kind of filter of the experience. Depending on what kind of music we added, we focus on different things. So very tiny, that had to do with the idea of our interpretation of sound as a representation of movement. So if the sounds were horizontal, you would focus on different things, or if it would be a very detailed sound, you would experience or focus on other things. This is three categories that we were working with, and then I won't go into the details of the music, but that is available in the book. And the type 2 was the categories of musical performances, and the performative events and the social listening situation became very important to engage with the scenic landscape and the sounds of the site. In this, the site and the shape of it seemed to involve the visitors in a very social experience. And these are the performing artists. I won't go into that. And this is some of the imagery from the performances during those years. And I will go directly to the last part, which is the sound installations. So in planning the invitations to sound artists, we tried to involve different artists that would provide a new perspective on the reading and understanding of the site, to create interventions that would open up new listening practices or perspectives. And we would basically ask them to come there and do an interpretation of this particular site. And these are the artists that were invited during this period, and we're going to listen to 3 of them with some shorter excerpts. And the first one is by the Norwegian sound artist Jana Vinderen, who works with field recordings and has actually a more of a, I mean, it's not an ecological point of view, but it's really a musical point of view, but she's working with sounds that are unmanipulated, and she's also interested in the idea of sounds of different animals. So in this case, her piece makes the park into a listening device to the connecting ocean. The second example is from the German sound artist Christina Kubic, and she worked with tuning forks that would open up a lot of in-between moments between sound and the soundscape itself. And she's interested in the relationship between the surrounding area and these added sounds. And the last example is from the American and semi-German duo Brandon LaBelle and Ken Ehrlich. And they were working with feedback sounds in the site and creating quite a strong experience of a sound that was not fitting into the place, and to see what happens there. And this session includes a field recording, so you would have a feeling of how the site itself sounds. And this is concluding image, and we reached the last picture of the promenade. And just a quick reflection on some of the voices that came forward when we had the retrospective talk in 2021 regarding these alien sounds, more or less, that could be, as Bilgren is mentioning, sort of reconnecting the place to its history as an industrial site. That was one observation. And the second one was that the experience of really traditional sounds or acoustic sounds in this kind of presentation became very abstract, according to Thomas Milroth. So it would generate the kind of perspective turn that you really had to consider your own experience and your own perception to relate to put yourself in a kind of analytical position. And thirdly, it's an observation on the architecture itself, that those hidden speakers creates a situation where you have also the shape of the site has creates a very unusual listening situation, where the experience of sharing something with the rest of the audience is very articulate and makes the experience stand out from other different listening situations. That was it. Thank you very much.
Molte grazie Franz, mi dispiace che abbiamo messo un po' di fretta, però veramente il pomeriggio è tanto fitto. Grazie però perché hai contribuito in modo sostanziale a questo pomeriggio e penso che molti paesaggisti avranno preso appunti, avranno voglia di lavorare nei loro progetti con un'ispirazione che hai contribuito a costruire. Grazie mille. Facciamo adesso una piccolissima pausa, veramente 5 minuti. 5, 4, 3.
intéressant, c'est ici par exemple.
Ah, le son est un peu fine.
Je vais pouvoir.
Le son,
Et en fait,
tout, hein.
il va imprimer. Et maintenant, tu peux cliquer en haut et tu frottes du haut vers le bas.
Le papillon n'a pas de son, hein, le papillon.
Ce qui est super intéressant, c'est.
Est-ce que ça a un peu changé votre manière de voir ce jardin-là, ou quand vous allez au jardin, ou dans la vie de tous les jours, est-ce que vous écoutez plus, est-ce que ça a changé quelque chose ou pas du tout? Vous pouvez dire pas du tout.
Je trouve que moi ça a fait un changement au niveau de ma vie, parce que maintenant je prends plus le temps de en fait maintenant moi j'aime bien me
Ricominciamo il pomeriggio. Tu fai dopo lui? Allora riprendiamo i lavori con Dian Shu. Non so se ho pronunciato bene, più o meno. Non so. Shu, it's okay, thank you. Giovane musicista, architetta del paesaggio che ci ha raggiunti da Parigi. La ringraziamo molto per essere venuta qui. Diana ha studiato violino e composizione al conservatorio, ha conseguito un master in musicologia, si è specializzata in composizione e computer music. Attualmente scusate, posso chiedere un po' di silenzio perché qua rimbomba tutto, non sento niente. Grazie. Attualmente sta svolgendo un dottorato di ricerca in musica con una tesi che ha un titolo bellissimo che provo a tradurre in italiano, dal francese: Simbiosi, ambienti, giardini in movimento. Cosa fa il giardiniere alla musica? Una tesi nella quale indaga il trasferimento di modelli e metodi dall'arte del giardino alla composizione musicale. Il titolo del suo intervento, Faire Jardin, costruire un approccio transdisciplinare, si riferisce appunto a questo, a un modo di fare giardino che sia capace di fondere le pratiche del giardinaggio con quelle della composizione e della esecuzione musicale. Quindi interessantissimo, siamo felici di avviarci verso la conclusione delle giornate rientrando nel giardino, che è un luogo insomma altrettanto simbolici di altri luoghi che abbiamo incontrato oggi, a partire dai ghiacciai. Grazie Diane, prego a te la parola.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm very honored that you reached out and invited me, and these 2 days have been very inspiring with these different approaches. And so my presentation will be more practical based. So as you said, I'm a composer and landscape architect, but I stopped a bit and returned to landscape architecture through my thesis on music. So anyway, so my thesis, which is research creation-based, question listening and compositional systems or setups as way to care and pay attention to human and non-human living. One of my thesis projects is to take care of the garden at the Maison des Sciences de l'Homme Paris Nord, where our laboratory is located. This garden is my field and my terrain of experimentation. As a musician and a gardener for this project, I asked myself, how can we reclaim and restore this garden? How can we develop bonds of attachment to the garden and build a community around it? Can listening be a relevant tool to establish a relationship with this garden? Could listening help us to take care better of this garden? And can listening be a tool for getting involved in gardening, particularly in training non-specialists and all gardeners with disabilities? So I will return a bit and set up my terrain and explain how it was made. Anyway, so the MSH Paris Garden was laid out as part of the construction of the new Maison des Sciences de l'Homme de Paris Nord and his platform Art, Sciences, Technologie. And this new university facility was built on part of a joint development zone called Nosal Chaudron. The competition was won by the Search architectural firm in 2007. The garden design was entrusted to Mutabilis Landscape Agency, and the building and the garden were delivered in 2015. The building is part of a project to redevelop post-industrial plots in Saint-Denis. The development zone, which houses the MSH, is steeped in an industrial past that can be seen in the soil analysis. The soil was heavily polluted with hydrocarbons and heavy metals, copper, lead, zinc, arsenic, and mercury. So the project to build the MSH and its garden thus responds to the challenges of a plot that can be described as a negative commons, a post-industrial polluted plot, a ruin in which we wish to reinvent possibilities of living with. The MSH garden was planted on land that has been completely terraced to meet the needs of the architectural site, and today occupies 5,000 square meters of open ground. This is more than 15% of the plot. The landscape project, implemented by the landscape architects, translates the commissioner's intention into a garden in motion, inspired by the gardener Gilles Clément. Following an initial state of planting, the plot was left to the self-organization of non-human species, almost unmanaged. This way of letting the dynamics of living organize the environment is another principle and specific to this garden. The garden was handed over in 2015 and was not maintained again, apart from an annual mowing of the path, until September 2021, the date of my arrival. So, the Lichen project, which stands for Lien, Instrument, Coopération et Création, Handicap, Écoute, Art et Symbiose, seeks to demonstrate the value of working within symbiotic dynamics and developing links between the various actors of the garden, musicians, gardeners, staff, etc. The aim is to build a common ground around the attention paid to the garden. This project was funded by the MSH Call for Research project, and it's financed by it. So the Lichen project is a huge project within which we make concerts in the garden, we make sound walks, we accompany school students and discover the biodiversity. And for this conference, I will talk more about one aspect of the project, which is working with the gardeners who take care of this garden. So the garden is maintained by the ESAT Vivre Autrement, based in Bobigny, also in the north of Paris. And ESAT is a medical and social establishment providing sheltered employment aimed at the social and professional reintegration of people with disabilities. So this project brought together a number of partners from the fields of landscape and music to organize gardening workshops, sound work, for a variety of audiences. And the aim of these various actions is to create an ecosystem of care and attention around this garden through different practices. So, as I said, the garden has been designed according to the principle of a garden in motion. The methodology of garden in motion, which you probably know, is based on the observation and practice of the gardener Gilles Clément. This type of garden is inspired by the wasteland, an open land abandoned by humans and reclaimed by plants and animal species. The dynamic of a wasteland are strong. According to Clément's model, in 14 years, a plot of land can go from meadow to forest. The garden in motion's method is based on the way in which the gardener will insert himself or herself into the flow of life and accompany the movement of species without any preconceived plan and with as little intervention as possible. I should also say that the garden in motion, and as we practiced in the garden, in the MSH garden, is a very resilient one. We do not need to water it. It's like self-sustainable. So, Gilles Clément explained this method. This practice consists in working with rather than against. the living beings present on the site. The general principle of doing with the energies in place means taking into account the behavioral diversity of the beings present in the garden. If we want to preserve the diversity of wandering species, we have to accept the changing shapes of the garden to the physical movement of these plants from one year to the next. So the strong dynamic of life in this type of garden requires the gardener to observe in order to know and choose before acting, but also it allows for mistakes. This makes it fertile ground for experimentation. This type of garden can become a pedagogical tool for trial and error methodology. So the project developed with the ESAT gardeners is both a landscape project, gardening project, and an introduction to listening and to music. Initially, the idea was to work on a common base, gardening. Then we gradually shifted the focus from visual observation to listening. The challenge was twofold: to train gardeners in the garden in motion method and to introduce them to listening and recording the sound environment. These two practices, gardening and listening, share a common tool, attentiveness. We therefore devoted the first two workshops on the garden in motion method. During the first gardening workshop, we spent the early part of the session walking around the garden, observing the general organization, the shape, the layout of the path, and above all, the evolution of the vegetation from one session to the next. In this way, we were able to appreciate the dynamics of living things. We conceived this tour of the garden as a trail with stops. These stops enable us to pay attention to remarkable places in the garden, places where a singularity, like a tree, a plant, a formation, a viewpoint, enable us to work on a particular notion. Using specific examples like the blackberry, for example, in the field, we were able to introduce the notion of biodiversity, ecological function, and symbiosis. We were able to uncover complex situations linked to the notion of biodiversity. For example, in this garden, the blackberry is really taking over the garden, so not allowing so much place for the human. But on the other hand, the blackberry is a very important plant for ecological function, for pollination, for hosting little birds, and so on. And so it was a question about how do we keep the blackberry, but how do we also keep the place for the human? So this is a kind of a complex thing to understand if you are a beginning gardener, for example. So the garden in ocean is a type of garden that requires a certain kind of attention. This way of paying attention and therefore caring enable us to understand the complex relationships that makes this ecosystem and the place we want to take it in as human. So I then wondered if listening could become a means for paying attention to the garden. Can the type of method we've developed in the garden be adapted to a listening methodology? How can we bring gardeners to a different kind of attention through listening? To move into the realm of listening, I seized on the concept of the art of noticing developed by Anna Tsing in her book, The Mushroom at the End of the World. Anna Tsing defines the art of noticing as a way of making ourselves attentive, of investigating and observing the environment in order to uncover the point of articulation, the workings of a complex hybrid milieu. For Tsing, it's a matter of being attentive to the polyphony. She uses a musical word of the environment. But Tsing doesn't give a method. So I read also Nicolas Nova, realizing that there is no actual method for this art of noticing. He proposed a method-based exercise in his book Exercice d'observation. What he proposes for listening is a reworking of the attention method described by Murray Schafer in A Sound Education, 100 Exercises in Listening and Sound Making, published in 1992. However, Nova makes explicit the ethics of observation, as well as the principle of building our perspective attention to the world. stressing the importance of, I quote, knowing how to direct our senses to vary the points of view or dimension of the situation under consideration and to learn to spot details with precision. In other words, to acquire tactical strategies. The principle being multiplying points of view, scales and postures, observing as a form of creation, and regular practice to build know-how over time. We therefore conceive the listening workshops for gardeners as a way of exercising another sense, one that is not usually involved in the landscape project, and whose exercise will enable us to understand interaction in the garden from another perspective. So how is it listening as a gardener? I ask myself, how do we build a methodology that suits both our field and our audience? We tested and built our methodology through experience and workshops. We organized 3 workshops on listening in 2022 as part of the complementary activities of the thesis, and 4 workshops in 2023 as part of the Lichens project. The first challenge was to choose the right vocabulary. Wishing to distance myself from a vision stemming from the invention of perspective, I wanted to avoid using the term soundscape and propose the term sound environment to underline the interactional properties of the sound heard, or sound milieu to emphasize the enveloping character of sound in the garden. However, with uninitiating, non-academic and or disabled audiences, the term soundscape speaks for itself. It immediately illustrates the points by comparison site. In this case, the analogy is both illustrative and educational. It's a term that easily makes the transition from the world of gardeners to the world of musicians. During our presentation, we tried to introduce the notion of sound milieu and sound environment and ended up using the term soundscape. So, to introduce you to the MSH garden, here's an excerpt recorded in the morning of April 23. So, of the 6 workshops with the gardeners, we organized a total of 5 in which we discussed and experienced listening. And in the 2 first workshops, we didn't take our recording equipment with us. We proposed an introduction to listening in the garden. We stopped at various points in the garden and proposed moments of listening. We suggested to make silence and listen for 1 or 2 minutes. And then we gave collective oral restitution of what we had heard. The question was as follows. What did you hear? Are the sounds you heard near or far? How would you describe them? Human, animal, city sounds? We also introduced more complex notions, such as the sound quality of a place by pointing out the echoes we could hear when we were close to the building. We were able to describe both open and closed environment by ear. The third workshop involved getting into grips with the recording tools by listening, realizing how the tool amplifies sound, understanding the directionality of XY capsules of the microphone. By listening, familiarizing ourselves with the tool, then positioning the microphone and recording of a sound source. The fourth workshop, structured as part of the Lichens project, was a repeat of the exercise from the first workshop. Then the fifth, we repeated the listening exercise and reintroduced the microphone, bringing along an ambisonic microphone with 4 capsules. We can listen to a montage of the impression of the gardeners, listening through the microphone and recording. So it's in French, but I gave to the translators a paper with what they are saying in English, so I don't know if it will be translating through your earphone, I hope.
Ce qui est super intéressant, c'est ici par exemple.
Ah, le son il est un peu fine.
Je vais pouvoir.
Le son,
Puis en fait,
tantôt.
il va imprimer. Et maintenant, tu tiens en haut et tu frottes du haut vers le bas.
Les papillons, il n'y a pas de son. Hein, les papillons.
Ah non, c'est pas mal, hein. Tiens, tu veux signer? Tiens, tu peux me la donner? On va en faire d'autres. Tu peux garder ton charbon de bois.
C'est bien.
Vraiment, une grosse. Je vais la garder, on va les garder sans support.
Ah, ça regardait comme ça de dire. Ah, les casques, les meilleurs, les casques. Hein.
Regarde, en fait, une feuille d'herbe ou quoi.
Ah, celui-là est parfait, ce casque. Ce casque n'est pas fait.
Après, ça peut être autre chose, hein. On peut aussi prendre.
Là, c'est plutôt calmant.
Voilà.
Plutôt calmant.
Ah, tu m'entends là?
Ouais, c'est plutôt calmant ici.
Ouais. Mais viens, on va se mettre là-bas.
Tu vas là-bas?
Ouais.
C'est plutôt calmant ici.
C'est calme?
Ouais. Par rapport là-bas. L'avion. J'entends.
C'est bizarre comme bruit.
Il y a un beau son,
J'entends
hein.
l'avion.
On dirait des avions à hélice.
Ouais, c'est vrai.
Puissant.
T'aimes bien le bruit des avions?
Tiens, c'est ça.
C'est puissant.
Ouais, on s'en
Les oiseaux, j'entends l'autoroute plus loin.
Là, j'entends des, je sais pas comment vraiment dire. Quand je bouge, j'entends des. Là, j'entends des vagues. Ouais.
Ouais, c'est ça, c'est ça. T'as raison. Ouais, c'est ça. Pas pour moi.
J'entends les feuilles. Quand le vent il passe, ça fait un petit son tout doucement. J'entends cet arbre-là qui fait des petits sons.
Et puis les oiseaux qu'on entend, c'est des étourneaux sansonnés. Ça s'appelle étourneaux sansonnés. Le son, il est un peu différent aussi, la manière dont il est dans l'espace. Il y a de l'écho.
So I said it was étourneau sansonné, but we hear actually a moineau domestique, so it was before, it was a montage. So anyway, the aim was to demonstrate different types of listening depending on the type of microphone used. The point was to understand that the way we listen differs according to the way the tool transmits sound. The gardeners walked around the garden with the microphone, chose listening points and recording. They asked to record their tool, in particular the brush cutter. Pardon.
Super intéressant, c'est ici par exemple.
Excusez-moi. So, the last workshop was devoted to listening to the ambisonic recordings made by the gardeners. I had previously edited the moments by classifying them by sound types, bird, human voices, city horns, brush cutters. First, we listened to the recordings broadcast through a 16 speaker dome which reproduce the 3D spatiality of sound. Then we asked ourselves about the quality of sound reproduction in the studio. How does listening in the studio compare with listening in the garden? The gardeners pointed out the differences. When senses such as smell and sight are no longer called upon, we listen differently. They noticed the microphone's inner noise in the recordings. The gardeners also noticed that they listen more attentively to small sounds, branches, birds. The second part of the studio workshop involved I don't like the term appropriating, but the sound environment by transforming it using real-time electroacoustic composition processes. Thanks to the tools loaned by the NRBBDMI, a project investigating ways of making music with the body's electricity, which also permits to non-musician instrumentists to take action in the sound and transforming sounds with gesture. We tested 3 types of spatial sound transformation. An EMG, so a muscle sensor, was mapped onto a decorrelation factor of the sound signal, which produced spatial sound point clouds. A second EMG sensor was mapped onto a circular sound trajectory, so we could hear the sound circulate. A potentiometer, just a button, was mapped to a sound frequency transformation system, a frequency shifter, but on all harmonics, which produces upward and downward glissandi on a random frequencies, so it's In groups of 3, the gardeners experimented by improvising, listening to the transformation and reacting to the transformation by their partners. During the studio workshop, we took breaks so that we could come back regularly to the gardener's impression. What did you hear? Did you understand the action of gesture on sound? What does this way of listening produce? One gardener compared the decorrelation coupled with the sound trajectory to a kind of storm. Another remarked on the spatial impression of the frequency shifter associated with decorrelation. He said, "The machine seems to be gaining height as if we were taking off." We can then listen to a short excerpt of an improvisation, a soundscape transformed by the gardener gesture. It is not a final product. Maybe you won't hear it as a music, but it was a moment of experimentation and listening. So these different workshops built on a progressive experimental approach from garden to studio and from gardening to musical improvisation enabled us to test a wide variety of ways of listening. These ways of practicing the art of noticing through listening enabled us to renew our view and our hearing of the MSH Paris Nord garden. We've been able to build attachment to the garden that involve different kinds of relationship through gesture and listening. This is what I'm starting to define as faire jardin or make garden, but not as make-believe. We really are on the ground making things happening. This is a way to build commons in a transdisciplinary way, building attachment and entanglement in a community through noticing and caring about the garden. We are currently in the evaluation phase of this project. We are wondering what listening can do to the gardener. In addition to renewing our knowledge of an environment, can such experiences enrich our gardening practices? how can we evaluate this type of experiences? So this experience can only be built on a qualitative approach, and the uncertainty remains evaluating the impact of our work on each and every gardener. In the garden, we noticed the quality of the work done after the garden in motion methodology workshops. Some gardeners were attached to certain plants and so didn't brush cut them anymore and did like paths that were contouring them. We noticed the meticulousness with which some of the paths are laid out. The start of the collective interviews with the gardeners is quite promising, with testimonials pointing to a certain transformation in the personal practices of the gardeners. So, as a conclusion, I'd like to leave you with these words by one of the gardeners.
Est-ce que ça a un peu changé votre manière de voir ce jardin?
I don't know if you hear it.
Quand vous allez au jardin ou dans la vie de tous les jours, est-ce que vous écoutez plus? Est-ce que ça a changé quelque chose ou pas du tout? Vous pouvez dire pas du tout.
Can we make the sound a bit louder?
Moi, au contraire, moi, je trouve que moi, ça a fait un changement au niveau de...
I don't know if you hear something, it's a bit thin. No, it's okay? Oh, okay. Sorry. It's the last slide. So. Is it okay?
Est-ce que ça a un peu changé votre manière de voir ce jardin-là? Quand vous allez au jardin ou dans la vie de tous les jours, est-ce que vous écoutez plus? Est-ce que ça a changé quelque chose ou pas du tout? Vous pouvez dire pas du tout. Juste...
Moi, au contraire, moi, je trouve que moi, ça a fait un changement au niveau de ma vie parce que maintenant, je prends plus le temps de... En fait, maintenant, moi, j'aime bien aller me promener dans des endroits où il y a de la nature. Comme je vais souvent à Fontainebleau, je marche et j'écoute pas de musique, juste j'entends la forêt, les oiseaux et du coup, maintenant, c'est au contraire, votre interprétation, ça a fait que j'aime bien aller et écouter.
C'est génial. C'est vrai.
Parce qu'avant, je faisais pas ça. Avant, j'allais pas dans les forêts me promener. Maintenant, j'y vais souvent. J'étais à la Fontainebleau parce que là-bas, j'aime bien la forêt. Il y a plein d'écoutes, il y a plein de choses à découvrir.
Thank you.
Allora, grazie Diane. Vedo che Nadine Schutz è già in postazione. Nadine Schutz è architetta del suono, compositrice di paesaggi sonori tra Parigi e Zurigo. È già stata evocata già anche ieri a proposito della collaborazione con il team di lavoro di Christophe Giraud. Il titolo dell'intervento è Giardini sonori, molto semplice, e la biografia è un po' lunga, ma cercherò almeno una parte di leggervela. Di Nadine Schutz, è una sound artist, architetta e ricercatrice svizzera con sede a Parigi, basandosi su ricerche teoriche, tecnologiche e poetiche, esplora l'ambiente uditivo attraverso installazioni sonore, performance e progetti acustici che mettono in relazione spazio e ascolto, paesaggio e musica, urbano e umano. Vado in fondo perché è troppo lungo. Nadine Schutz è laureata in architettura e progettazione urbana all'ETH di Zurigo e per 4 anni ne ha diretto il laboratorio multimediale. Silenzio, per favore. E per 4 anni ne ha diretto il laboratorio multimediale dell'Istituto di Architettura del Paesaggio, dove ha installato un nuovo studio per la simulazione spaziale di paesaggi sonori e ha discusso la sua tesi di dottorato Cultivating Sound, the Acoustic Dimension of Landscape Architecture. nel 2017. Ha insegnato in diverse scuole di architettura e arte in Svizzera, Francia, Gran Bretagna, Austria e Giappone. Attualmente è compositrice, ospite del team sugli spazi acustici e cognitivi dell'IRCAM SMTS presso il Centre Pompidou di Parigi. Grazie a Nadine e gli lascio la parola. Ti ascoltiamo.
Thank you very much for this presentation and for the invitation to this very heartfelt place here, which I didn't know before, but which I learned to appreciate during the last hours and days. I thank you in advance. I know that your ears have been quite asked to pay attention already. I hope with my presentation on sound gardens to offer you a sonic journey which is at the level of concluding this shared listening time together. The story of landscape and gardens in Western culture has traditionally been described through and for the eyes. The acoustic dimension of historical gardens only reveals itself once we open our ears to their present existence. For this talk on sound gardens, I have prepared a format that I have been experimenting with recently, which is to give more space to listening, even if I'm supposed to be speaking. I have composed a soundtrack covering the entire time span at my disposal for this presentation, which means that instead of leaving a few pauses for the sounds of the landscape, I let those sounds direct my speech. In this regard, I will recommend you, for those that use the headphones for translation, while the sounds are playing, to take them off because the quality of these speakers is quite good and you will enjoy it better. And also, you will be better aware that we are listening in a shared space, here and now. So, I will play now and never stop. Sensory separation doesn't exist in situ. In the field, a tangible place or landscape experience derives from a complex interconnection of different sensory impressions. Some of you might have visited the garden of Villa d'Este in Tivoli. Once its multiple water sounds have immersed your ears, you might still hear them if you look at those silent photographs, but made while listening. What is the sound we hear when we visit historical sites and places? Landscape sound is always contemporary, but it is embedded in a site-related continuity that links past, present, and future. We listen to those places with our own ears, which are the ears of the 21st century. There is no historical evidence at hand to prove the sonic intentions of their original design, but what we can hear with our own ears in situ, by skipping the irresolvable and retrospective question of design intentionality that too often prevails in historical research approaches, we can reveal traces of acoustical design practice that evidence the long-standing link between sound, space, and landscape. The investigation of historical gardens I suggest here is thus not a backwards-oriented reflection, but rather a way of listening forwards, or, in Simon Schama's inspirational words, instead of being yet another explanation of what we have lost, it is an exploration of what we may yet find. To demonstrate this approach, I will start with the sound extracts from the three main case studies, gardens and parks at different sizes and different cultural origins, on which I have been focusing in my PhD research supervised by Christoph Schierer at ETH Zurich and defended in 2017. The exuberant water garden, built in the 16th century on the command of Cardinal Ippolito d'Este for his country palace in Tivoli in Italy. The 19th century Romanticism inflected public park Butte-Chaumont in Paris, and Shisendo, an intimate ensemble of temple and garden built by 17th century poet Ishikawa Joseon in the outskirts of Kyoto. We will now go back to Villa d'Este. I would like to be able to take you there, but you might close your eyes once it resounds and try to do a virtual trip through those arrangement of different spatialities created by water. We have been starting at the villa, passing through a small fountain house, and then being surprised by the wine glass-shaped fountain, which opens up this sequence of impressive water shapes. We have then been exploring the 100 fountains from behind while sloping down the garden, passing through the oval fountain before lingering the 100 fountains alley, and then taking a shortcut to the Belvedere, because this whole expansion and immersion of space through a more or less strong presence of water sound repeats itself again. So the villa is built on a slope overlooking the landscape, making its garden like a cavity, which then opens again up to the wider surrounding. The fountains, with their soon sprinkling behavior, but then whooshing and swooshing presence, would create a more and more immersive experience. You haven't heard anything else anymore until coming to the end of the garden, who opens up your ear to actually a sound that is part of the garden, but which isn't built within the campanile of the town. So this garden itself explores a force of immersion, but yet plays on this difference between this immersion and this openness on the surrounding. The second case study, Buttes-Chaumont, 19th century park in Paris, built on an ancient carrier and trash dump with its nicely shaped topography in a very different way, but also seamless through topography, would let us mix while walking through it the relationship between the sounds of the surrounding city and the sonic events in the park. This is the topographical plan by Alphand. We are going to start on an upper lawn, looking over the park with the central temple of Sibylle. So while lingering through Butte-Chaumont, we have been stopping at 3 different positions. The first on the upper lawn, then down at the artificial lake, and again halfway up on the grass next to the stream where people gather and bring their instruments in summer to add their own music. So what we discover actually is that the acoustic dimension of those gardens and parks is not just like a container. It's a combination, a very complex combination of different sources, and our body, together with the topography, becomes the mixing tool of this sonic landscape. And such observations have led me to a first hypothesis: what if silence, rather than the absence of sound, would be a certain mix of sound, within which we have a choice? We are not just obliged to listen to them. We can be involved in the mix of what we hear, become part of our sonic landscape composition. While those examples are more presented here with regard to the mix of different sources, gardens also play an intimate role, a very important role for exploring a more intimate level with design elements shaped very precisely at the intimate scale of human perception, like the Catena d'Acqua in middle of the gardens of Villa Lante, which is shaped for creating a water sound that is very much articulated, almost like becoming a voice speaking to us. So in these days, we have been talking about conserving and curing and curating sonic landscapes, but we might also talk about cultivating sound, trying to reveal those very diversity of the sonic voices inherent in the materiality of landscape. It's almost like a craft And this leads us to the already cited example of the shishiodoshi, the bamboo tubes in Japanese gardens, which are themselves enhancing a certain kind of silence through a very strong, specific sound, giving a rhythm to our perception of time. This sound is crafted, or as Toru Takemitsu, Japanese composer, would say, painstakingly, I wish to carve that sound with my own hands to confront silence. We were just walking along in Shisendo, the Kyoto temple garden built by Ishikawa Josan in the 17th century, which is supposed to be the first garden artist having integrated this device as an aesthetical instrument in a garden. The device originally was scaring deer away. We have been listening to the same garden again, this time sitting on the Engawa, the space between inside and outside in the main room of the temple. You could hear different things in that recording. For example, the sound of the shishiodoshi has changed. This might be to the fact that it has been just recently exchanged. The bamboo tube is renewed regularly for it to keep its exceptional resonance and tuning. So the gardeners have about 6 of those always at reserve, exchanging it recently. But you have always heard changes in the environment, in that space that the shishiodoshi enhances, in that space on silence, which changes, in this case, recorded in the evening with an upcoming storm, with rain, changing weather. You hear also season in there. You hear the insect, the susumuchi, which are famous for singing in the autumn. You could also hear that there are oaks in the garden. You hear falling acorns in the wind. And you could also hear that suddenly a water stream comes up when it's filled up by the rain without us having changed places. So it seems that this variety of auditory spaces which open up can happen without us moving through the garden, just a change that happens through time. So maybe there are actually also other spaces than those spaces that we can map and localize with our usual drawing tools. So what we discover while listening to those different places is that there is probably a heterogeneity of space that we can discover in listening to gardens and landscape. If I talk about heterogeneous spaces, meaning it reunites different dimensions, of course we have a topological reading if a sound is left or right or behind us, but we also open up another dimension which is linked to the spectral composition of the sonic environment and time. Here in Nepodaros, this theater is mostly cited with regard to its capacity to let the voice of actors being in the middle come directly to the audience's ears. Seldomly we think about the fact that this theater is an insert in a hill on which pine trees are growing, inhabited by cicadas who has probably been there before human species has come over, and who create a keynote of that place, which, beside their presence, still leaves enough space for human voice to exist. You see here in that spectrogram the cicada spectrum at the upper part of the spectrum and the human voices below. So actually this spectrotemporal space allows for other ways of coexistence than just spatial expansion. In the same time, looking at the spectrogram of the second recording of the Shishio-doshi in the Kyoto Shisendo Garden, we clearly distinguish the Sutsumushi, this insect that announces the autumn, and the rustling ground with a lot of space for different things to happen in between, just marked by the sudden appearance of Shishio-doshi. Here, a spectrogram analysis of the cascade in Villa d'Este garden, where suddenly one sound source would mask all the others. We don't hear any bird or any voice anymore. And then the spectrogram analysis of the first location in Butte-Chaumont, where you remark the rumbling of the city in the lower bass region and the bird song which is occupying the space above it. So, which reveals us maybe spatiality as something else than just the space. Maybe spatiality is more than that. It is a perceptual quality. Of course, it's a condition of physical space, but it's also an emotional state. And so I try to find a vocabulary to express that, associating these different observations inside with a sonic landscape topoi. With Butte-Chaumont being associated to the echo, to this negotiation between different sources through topography. The forces being that presence and absence, alternating of different sounds being present through broadband noise in Villa d'Este, and voices being that projection of individual appearances in a wide open soundscape. So this is part of a vocabulary which I tried to define as a design basis in my PhD research, accompanied by Christoph Schiro, and which I'm happy to say today it still is useful to me as a design tool in my nowadays practice, which I developed after realizing that actually there is still a huge gap between sound studies on the landscape and the actual practice in the field. So I tried to define auditory qualities as landscape values with vivacity where presence would replace silence, spatiality where orchestration would replace separation, and involvement where interaction would replace isolation. So I will now end with some examples. The first one is a garden along train tracks in Champs-sur-Marne, in the east of Paris, where this sonic space left between those trains passing is mostly ignored because we just talk about the noise. So the question in that garden was, what if we would try to valorize actually this space with celebrating this openness that the train tracks would provide once there is no train. So you see here a little bit of an overview of the public space. It's a recently finished project. And we will probably first hear a little bit the ambiences created there. In fact, train tracks are often very important with regard to bioacoustic quality of an environment, providing ecological continuity. Just for such real estate developments, often the whole vegetation is cut to ground, what provokes this silence which makes the arrival of the train even more brutal. So here, this project is a collaboration with the landscape architects on this ecological continuity, but within that, the work on interactive sound devices that would, in a more playful way, and invite to listen to those specific sonic landscapes with instruments built from the wood of trees that had been cut for the real estate projects. So, for example, a wood chime that would move in the wind, or the insect voices mill built with free wheels of bicycles, which would, in a playful way, allow you to talk with insects. Or what you heard as well in the recording is a musical irrigation where dripping irrigation falls on cymbals before it's distributed in the earth. And specific plantations, for example, at air ventilation with grass that moves and produces a gentle noise in the wind. In the same way, I just submitted a project for the village of the athletes for the Olympic Games. So working on ambiences of two different courtyard gardens through vegetal orchestration and specific sonic instruments which also take functions like a kids game. What you just heard is the first wind-devoted ambience with suspensions that move in the wind, but also dancing leaves that allow you to integrate your composition in the soundscape, or musical herbs that move in the wind and produce a sound once you touch them. The second ambience is more domestic, linked to shared gardening. So here, different sonic fountains are combined. One is creating resonances in a cavity in which water just drips in small drops. It's also a drinking fountain. And the other one is an exploration of acoustic resonance in different sizes of tubes, which is again a more active way of interacting with that sonic presence in the landscape. So in both cases, these gardens combine more contemplative involvement with the sonic landscape on the one hand, and on the other hand, a more active exploration and involvement with them, based on the hypothesis that probably we don't think enough about how sound is created. What are the processes and actions and events that lead to the sonic environments that we live daily? While these projects are at the residential levels for daily environment, I currently also work on a project where the question of the garden is taken out of the soil on a big bridge which is built in the north of Paris, and where I was exposed to the reflection, what is actually the sonic landscape on a bridge that is hovering, 300 meters bridge that's hovering over a huge field of train tracks. My reflection here was a chance to think about this exposure to this other landscape, the living landscape that we tend to forget sometimes behind birds and frogs. That is the wind and the sun and the rain, the elementary dimension of landscape to which we are so much exposed on this out-of-the-soil landscape experience on the bridge. And so in this case, again, different installations combine a sonic landscape experience, this time devoted to the wind, the sun, and the rain, and integrated with the bridge structure. So what you could hear is first the wind made of aeolian strings whose vibrations are captured and amplified from speakers involved on the pedestrian level on the bridge structures. Then the sun, who is solar information transduced to a composition using vibration transducers that make the structure itself emitting the sound. And last, suspensions that let the rain resound. What you heard is a prototype. The final notes of the rain will be notes composed from the different bell references from that famous churches that you hear from the bridge, and the predominant frequencies in the passing train fraining noises. So for concluding, I want to say those projects are big-scale projects. They take me 5 to 8 years to realize them. And it takes a lot of time, probably also for people to explore them. These different instruments are always arranged with a certain distance between them. On the bridge, about 100 meters between different instruments. In the gardens, probably about 50 meters. So again, they play on that liberty of the users to create their own soundscape, but invite also for exploration through hearing. And for achieving those projects, for me, the creation of performances and more immaterialized musical condition, always starting with the fact, what is the materiality of that sonic landscape, using dry leaves, water sounds, and so on, for a composition that would then become a director of more musical instruments. being it aeolian, pluvial, bioacoustic, intersensory, or instrumental. Acoustic landscaping is characterized by an important delay between a potential that's created and the sound that will be heard, or not. Like planting a tree that needs time to grow before offering shade. This desynchronization in design thinking is somehow inherent to landscape, but not enough considered, especially when it comes to sound. The temporality of sonic presences gives way to the integration of non-controllable or only limited controllable elements. With their dynamic appearance and disappearance, voices are evocative for life. Voices are also evocative for the invisible and for cyclic processes, such as seasonal change. Voices, as sonic landscape topos, are multiple, transient, and sometimes ambivalent. As an elusive indicator of living presence, they bear the very essence of our emotional affinity for landscape. All the instruments that you have heard in that presentations, being they natural or musical, have been played by landscape. Thank you for your attention.
Io ringrazio Nadine tantissimo per questa relazione veramente ispirante, molto bella, grazie. E abbiamo un po' di tempo, vi ringrazio anche per aver rispettato tutti quanti la tempistica, per cui inviterei sicuramente quelli che sono ancora qua, relatori di oggi, anche se alcuni più d'uno, tutti forse, hanno dovuto partire, ma io come da consuetudine chiamerei comunque anche gli altri, anche quelli chi è in sala ha voglia di raggiungerci, un po' di sedie ci sono, le altre le giriamo dalla prima fila queste rose e concludiamo un po' con tutti quanti. Francesco, non sfuggire.
Avete un'orchestra davanti a voi, ora devono suonare. Se qualcuno, non c'è molto tempo, però se qualcuno ha una domanda per rompere il ghiaccio, poi qui ci sarà ci sono molte persone, molte voci, quindi possiamo divertirci. C'è il professor Christophe Giraud. Hai una domanda da fare ai relatori? No, era uno scherzo.
Io penso che è importante che il paesaggio parli, prende voce. Basta.
E quindi c'è un terzo interlocutore che è il vuoto che abbiamo davanti, no? Ci sono le voci dei relatori, il pubblico e...
Buonasera. Quando Diane ha parlato di memoria topologica, ricordo male? Ha citato questo termine, Nadine, una di voi due. Mi è venuto in mente un vecchissimo corso fatto allo UAV col professor Padoan, che ci faceva fare... Beh, non era rivolto a lei in particolare. Sì, è giusto. Mi pare Diane, ma forse è stata... No, mi pare Diane. Ha parlato di memoria topologica. Qualcuno di voi ha citato questa cosa. E mi è venuto in mente un vecchissimo corso con il professor Padoan allo UAV, quando ci faceva fare degli esperimenti a lezione e ci diceva che voleva farci provare a immaginare la distanza attraverso solo il senso dell'udito. E mi pare che Diane raccontasse qualcosa del genere negli esperimenti del giardino, quando i giardinieri dicevano che immaginavano le cose, i suoni in base alla distanza. Ecco. Quindi è una cosa assolutamente vera. Cioè, abbiamo fatto questo gioco a lezione durante il quale facevamo finta di avere solo il senso dell'udito e in base a quello stabilire le distanze e le provenienze degli oggetti che sentivamo. E non ci pensiamo a volte, ma è reale.
Sorry, I may add something regarding birds. Birds do that as well. They can estimate the distance of other birds by the analysis of the amplitude of the song. So they have a special estimation of in 3D according to not only on the amplitude, of course, but they do that as well.
Maybe there is also, I have referred to different types of spaces, topological, spectrotemporal, but also intersensory spaces. And in terms to topological space and memory, I think the interaction between the environment, like the more stable parts of the environment, like topography, on the one hand, and the other way of the type of sources is very important. Probably when you have been listening to Buchamont, you have been recognizing once human voices resounded, it was more easy for you to imagine space. We are very accustomed to human voices, so we more easily, intuitively understand the way that space and their propagation in a certain environment would change their frequency while they're traveling through space. And I guess maybe even, I haven't studied that, but I guess maybe people that are living in an environment where they're very much used to the presence of certain birds' voices would more easily read distances through these birds' voices than if we would have like unknown voices. I'm wondering about that.
I don't know, I have no idea about that, but it's to be sure that we have a better knowledge of the place where we live, actually, and it includes the birds that we have around. So, for instance, I know the birds that live in my garden, but if I travel to Italy, it might be much more difficult for me to identify and to understand the soundscape and the part of the soundscape due to the birds or the biophony. So, yes, of course, the experience makes the difference.
No, volevo solo aggiungere a questo che in realtà ci sono esperienze ed esperimenti che ci mostrano come anche noi esseri umani siamo molto, abbiamo molte più capacità di ecolocare di quanto non si pensi comunemente. È quello che fanno molte persone cieche che vanno in bicicletta o che sanno stimare le dimensioni approssimative di uno spazio o in qualche caso eccezionale addirittura riconoscere degli oggetti in fronte a sé senza toccarli, mettendo dei click con la lingua e ascoltando la risposta uditiva. E per chi vuole farlo, in alcune città, forse la più vicina qui è Bologna, si può giocare a baseball bendati, con una pallina che bippa e tramite insomma, l'ascolto ci sono delle questioni fisiche che riguardano il suono, tra cui l'effetto Doppler, il volume, eccetera, eccetera. È possibile fare esperienza della nostra capacità, insomma, allenandosi un pochino della nostra capacità di stimare distanza e anche posizione. Insomma, poi qui si apre un altro mondo che riguarda anche la psicoacustica, ci sono ingegneri anche che ci lavorano, però volendolo si può fare esperienza di questa cosa.
May I add also the exercise about spatial hearing is based also on Jens Blauert's acoustic research, and it is maybe because I have a background in spatial audio and computer music that is a kind of exercise that I find interesting to make also with other people to know their environment and the construction of the acoustics of the environment too. Thank you.
Salve, grazie delle ottime relazioni che abbiamo ascoltato. Volevo chiedere una cosa che riguarda il futuro prossimo, visto che abbiamo parlato molto di passato e di presente. Se c'è una vostra riflessione, un pensiero su quello che sarà il futuro prossimo dei soundscape. Mi riferisco in particolare, per esempio, al traffico, per esempio, no? Che cambierà e sta cambiando perché si sta elettrificando e per cui c'è una diminuzione potente dei decibel delle città e tutto questo cambierà e farà cambiare molte cose. Quindi questa era la domanda, grazie.
I can try to reply from the naturalist point of view. I agree that in the cities this might change due to the electric engines, but this does not change that much on the highways. I mean, the sound due to the cars passing on the highways are mainly due to the friction, to the tires on the road. So it won't change that many things. For natural soundscape, what we expect is a kind of homogeneization of the soundscape, because there is a loss of species that are specific to like cold environment, like the forest I talked about, and you have opportunistic species that spread around and will probably dominate the soundscape. We heard a lot of blackbirds in the recordings. That's a typical sound that you can hear anywhere, and it might increase. And then, in terms of technophony, except the case of the electric cars and bikes. For the planes, I'm not very optimistic. We still fly a lot. I flew to come here, which was not a very good idea, but I had no other choice. So I get that the technophony might increase. And in the field, in the agriculture, we go back to Rachel Carson with the silent spring due to the pesticides. So you have less and less birds which occupy the crop fields, and less insects, including bees. So you go towards a more silent soundscape in agriculture as well.
My answer to that would be maybe landscape architecture and gardening can have models that enhance biodiversity. This is the things we try to make in the MSH Paris Garden, like letting the auto-organization of species, and it's kind of a refuge for the birds. We have recorded Chardon élégant 1 year, but we didn't saw them again. I don't know, maybe, but maybe this can be an answer.
Well, I think to complement that point, that's a thinking that's going on to a more direction where acoustic thinking is should be more integrated with a holistic thinking about our environmental challenges, talking about climate issues in cities. We are now concerned again to bring water into the cities. And so, as we have learned through not only mine, but other presentations as well, so water has a quite important acoustic impact on the relationship of the overall present sources in an environment. What you mentioned is the concern about biodiversity, which is intrinsically linked to several people, and especially you, working about this topic. And for example, coming to cars, this what we observe indeed that the motor noises are very predominant at a lower speed, but then it's like frictions with surface but also with the air. With regard to surface, there are now research going on for absorbing asphalt, which has interesting aspect that it could be also letting water infiltrate to the soil and probably also contribute in a way to a climate, more optimized climatic design. But all those aspects are still quite far from being broadly deployed. For example, with regard to these surfaces, then it comes in another security issue about the normalization of glitching and so on. So I think it will take time, but I think we can also achieve acoustic quality in the future through acoustic thought as an integrated topic, including also social aspects, as they have mentioned. A bit more specifically to the disappearing motor noises, what you have certainly also observed that they are currently replaced at a lower speed by designed electroacoustic car noises, including commissions to composers like Michel Jarre and so on, creating those sounds. But the question is, who orchestrates all those brands making their specific electroacoustic sounds in the city? They also maybe let us think about another topic that maybe we are not ready for silence because we are still stuck in a modernistic productivity thinking that lets us have the idea that actually thing that makes noise is productive, like a dust cleaner and so on, that we bring back because there is no sound. And I think that's in a way intrinsically linked to maybe decroissance and also slowing down of productivity. And so what we see is actually it's a totally integrated topic. Soundscapes will not be better in the future, just working on sound alone.
But in France, when we asked to reduce the speed by 10 kilometers, we had a revolution. So, yes. Not sure it's possible.
Well, I think also maybe what is a question I ask myself, because sound is often still commonly used in planning processes when it's a problem at the early stage. We identify areas where we shouldn't build residential areas because they are in areas with huge air traffic and so on. But actually sound is not so much used to motivate planning and political decisions in that way. We know that it's a very sensible topic historically as well. But I feel sometimes, if you would let people decide by listening to what does it bring to reduce speed, for example, or what would it allow for sounds to deploy once some streets are devoted to pedestrian users and so on. I think sound has a quite of force to project ourselves into the future that could probably help to a more diverse thinking about such decisions, which are often very much defined by a more conservative anxiety about losing something.
Io penso che la cosa più importante dopo tutte queste 2 giornate è che manca nella società oggi la capacità di sentire e dobbiamo veramente lavorare sull'ascoltare. Siamo in un'epoca dove c'è una saturazione di immagini digitale, di suoni digitali. Tutti i giovanotti hanno la metà del tempo le orecchie pieni di strumenti che collegano direttamente l'iPhone alla testa. E io direi che dobbiamo iniziare una coscienza più ampia sull'ambito tra l'ascoltare. Questa è un po' la proposita che abbiamo sentito questa mattina. Io direi che è l'aspetto il più importante. Poi, qual è la sostanza stessa del suono che sentiamo è un'altra cosa, è piuttosto la sensibilità che secondo me dovrebbe aprirsi molto di più al mondo.
Se posso aggiungere, è proprio una prospettiva, no? E il suono è un'occasione. Abbiamo sentito tanto parlare di biodiversità sonora, forse manca la voce della bioculturalità. Ci sono studi legati ai paesaggi sonori, legati proprio alla valorizzazione e alla preservazione di quest'altra sfera, no? Che è quella culturale. Io trovo che riuscire a vedere i fenomeni antropici con lo sguardo, e purtroppo il lavoro di Nadine è eccezionale perché si parte da un glossario che è prevalentemente visivo. Io devo dire lo sguardo uditivo, cioè è un ossimoro, però è così, per adesso è così, quindi c'è davvero tanto da fare anche dal punto di vista lessicale rispetto a questa semantica che manca.
It's true, it has been proved that the vocabulary almost all across the world is dominated by visualism, actually. And then comes hearing, and then touch, and then smelling, and so on. So we are mainly visual animals, I would say.
Yeah, and probably it's in the main topic of this, the title of this whole study days, including not only sound but also silence. And while several of us have been confronted with questions about what is noise, what is sound, we all have tried in a way to approach possible ideas of silence, which is probably not a one single thing, but it's certainly more diverse than the generalized notion that nobody really defines what we are listening for when we think about silence. We probably not listen out for those landscapes being emptied of all possible voices. And I think that's also part of the work that starts with listening, to not only define what we don't want to hear, but what would we desire to hear, more broadly thought, maybe also what others could hear and express. And so I think that's maybe the quest of silence is maybe to the word just takes our attention to that kind of emptiness, being it semantic or social, about this abstract wish that we embody in the word of silence, and we don't know exactly what we want to say with that. And I would be quite curious actually to hear a bit from the audience, because you were asking us questions all day, but it would be interesting probably also for us to hear from the audience what kind of thoughts about sound and silence you could probably take with you after those days, or that have been provoked by the different communication, because we are not here, I guess, to just teach you what silence should be, because we are also just like painstakingly searching for a certain quality of sound that might be silence.
Volevo solo dire una cosa, un po' anche, è una provocazione ma fino a un certo punto, che secondo me la cosa migliore che possa capitare ai soundscape è che si smetta di chiamarli soundscape, che si parli di paesaggio anche in una dimensione di ascolto, anche della presenza del suono nel paesaggio. Insomma, io credo che il fatto che si parli di soundscape un po' è troppo tardi, credo, cioè fa già parte naturalmente del linguaggio. Sappiamo che la lingua poi è una cosa, le parole che usiamo evolvono per conto loro, per cui naturalmente è una nozione molto utile, che è già storicizzata, che è condivisa dalla comunità scientifica, che è definita, a quella definizione dobbiamo per forza di cose fare riferimento, per cui spero temo sia tardi, però magari con gli altri sensi che un po' alla volta stiamo recuperando, magari le cose andranno diversamente, forse questo aiuterà a pensare il paesaggio come paesaggio e non come paesaggio sonoro, paesaggio luminoso, paesaggio di molecole che arrivano al nostro naso e percepiamo come odori e così via. Insomma, è una cosa che un po' auguro.
Sì, è in coda a questo commento che condivido in pieno di Francesco. Per me il futuro del soundscape è anche che non sia un'ulteriore culturalizzazione del paesaggio, non sia un'ulteriore cristallizzazione di un'ecologia che si modifica e continuerà per sempre a modificarsi, a estinguersi, a riconfigurarsi e via dicendo. E quello che è successo con il mondo del visuale è stato che noi abbiamo cristallizzato gli ambienti, abbiamo cristallizzato l'ecologia, ci abbiamo costruito attorno a una cornice, abbiamo un'immagine di essa e quell'immagine non può essere trasgredita, altrimenti iniziamo a entrare in crisi, il nostro sistema visuale ed estetico nei confronti di quell'ecologia entra in crisi. Spero che con il soundscape e con gli altri sensi non si scada in questo atteggiamento, in questa prospettiva così fortemente oggettificante delle ecologie, ma si inizi piuttosto a considerarle da un punto di vista relazionale, come dal momento che il suono sono vibrazioni, come gli oggetti vibrano e rimandano le vibrazioni sonore, cioè la modificazione di pressione dell'aria, anche noi facciamo allo stesso modo e quindi siamo parte di una ecologia. Il suono ci insegna questo. Non esiste questa separazione che invece l'immagine forse ci ha imposto. E quindi forse l'augurio che faccio al suono è quello che ci insegni che possiamo vivere le ecologie in modo attraverso delle relazioni, cioè attraverso cosa loro ci domandano e cosa noi possiamo domandare a loro.
Volevi dire qualcosa? Una parola da Budapest?
Grazie. Prima di tutto vorrei ringraziare a tutti gli interventi, tutti i relatori per gli interventi e la loro attenzione a dei luoghi su cui hanno portato un'attenzione molto accesa e molto articolata. È il risultato delle ricerche e delle contemplazioni ci hanno portato qua. Questi 2 giorni mi hanno portato a delle riflessioni, cerco di essere concisa, ma mi sono venute alcuni pensieri. Prima di tutto vorrei riflettere a delle registrazioni che abbiamo visto sia ieri sia oggi, che testimoniano qualcosa, vogliono testimoniare qualcosa che sono in perdita di suoni, perdita di specie. In questi giorni abbiamo parlato più della biosfera meno umana, ma ripensando all'angolo amazzonico della Terra, dobbiamo dire anche che non solo i suoni di animali stanno perdendo, cioè stiamo perdendo, ma anche tribù. Mi ha fatto pensare della nostra cultura, della nostra civiltà, Béla Bartók, che andò in villaggi remoti a registrare delle canzoni e delle musiche tradizionali della gente che viveva insieme alla natura per secoli e secoli, ha contemplato quella natura con cui viveva. Ci sono rimasti delle registrazioni gramofoniche che dopo poi la prima guerra mondiale ha portato via tanta di questa gente che era testimone di questa cultura. Ma non parlando solo di Béla Bartók e di questa gente, ma poi una cosa che Béla Bartók ha importato queste esperienze vissute in natura nelle sale di concerto per importarle nella musica classica, ma possiamo pensare anche a Olivier Messiaen, che ha portato il canto degli uccelli nella sala di concerti, o possiamo pensare anche a Monteverdi o a Vivaldi, che hanno portato il paesaggio nella musica. E da qui mi nasce un pensiero che durante questi 2 giorni abbiamo vissuto e abbiamo visto con voi tramite i vostri interventi, che come andare in natura, registrare e portare qui in sala è un approccio dalla natura o dal paesaggio in registrazione, ma se ascoltiamo la musica di Monteverdi o di Vivaldi, questo è l'approccio capovolto. Se possiamo ricostruire il paesaggio di Vivaldi tramite la sua musica. Quindi può essere una sì.
Interprete una scommessa.
Una scommessa, sì. Quindi per me adesso è arrivata una conclusione che anche queste musiche sono un certo tipo di soundscape. È un'altra cosa, forse un'ultima, una coppia di parole: applicazione e implicazione. Abbiamo visto anche esempi durante i vostri interventi che dopo l'applicazione di strumenti viene anche l'implicazione, entrare in atto e agire per il futuro. E mi è piaciuto tantissimo, è una motivazione, un'aspirazione personale per me stessa di arrivare al punto, all'altezza di poter cantare o di saper cantare con le montagne. Quindi questa è la mia riflessione, grazie.
Prima che si si svuoti la sala. Io sarei per concludere. Un ultimo intervento da Brescia, in alto. Brevissimo, per favore.
Innanzitutto ringrazio moltissimo la Fondazione per avermi fatto passare questi 2 bellissimi giorni e ringrazio ovviamente tutti i relatori che hanno detto delle cose che mi hanno molto appassionato e preso. Detto questo, mentre passavano le vostre le varie slide e ho sentito le varie parole, ho pensato molto anche a quella direttiva recentissima della primavera dello scorso anno, direttiva europea, in merito alla rinaturalizzazione delle aree degradate. Io penso che tutti voi, o quasi tutti voi, la conosciate, no? Nel senso che è una direttiva che prefigura il recupero alla natura di aree che sono ex cave piuttosto che ex industriali, eccetera, eccetera. E ho pensato a questi paesaggi che ci sono lì dentro, e ho pensato a questi magnifici apparecchi che oggi permettono di cogliere i rumori con questa puntualità, con questa localizzazione molto precisa, eccetera, eccetera. E ho pensato che lì dentro, no, si poteva svolgere un soundscape, no, dove da un lato si registravano lo sgretolamento degli intonaci di pezzi di edifici che stanno crollando, e dall'altro lato la natura che riprende questi luoghi, e quindi una specie di doppia registrazione dove man mano diminuiscono, diciamo, il soundscape del cemento che crolla, perché la natura, no, viene fuori con una maggiore presenza e a coprire, diciamo, questa cosa. Pensavo questo soprattutto sentendo il lamento del ghiacciaio, come che è un lamento che ci fa vedere un futuro, diciamo, ormai non più distopico, ma drammaticamente vero, no? E dall'altro lato però questo tipo di questo soundscape in queste aree dove la natura ho finito, dove
anche
la natura
perché ci sono dei relatori che non hanno
cioè
l'auricolare,
mi dava invece una speranza rispetto a un futuro, cioè, e quindi questo per riequilibrare un attimo questo pianto della cascata. Grazie mille.
Allora, concludo con una riflessione semplice. Vi ricordo, però prima vi ricordo che noi stiamo lavorando qui in Fondazione molto alacremente per un evento che è il premio internazionale Carlo Scarpa per il giardino, che si svolgerà il 13 di aprile qui in Fondazione, nella chiesa Sant'Eunisto, e forse parleremo di paesaggi nell'altro mondo, in Messico, che hanno a che fare anche col tema del silenzio e dell'ascolto, quindi spero che molti di voi potranno tornare. Grazie a tutti voi. Io raccogliamo l'espressione di sintesi di Christophe, cioè quella di esortarci a coltivare l'esercizio dell'ascolto. Lo abbiamo fatto per 2 giorni in questa sala che per nostra fortuna ha anche una qualità acustica e ci ricorda anche, no, la qualità, non solo la quantità dell'ascolto da dedicare. E io credo che ci manca, per essere veramente completo questo programma, a questo punto doveva esserci una cosa musicale e dovevamo trovarci tutti qui complici dell'innalzamento del decibel, cioè cantare un coro a squarciagola e riempire, diciamo, questa stanza con le nostre voci in modo anarchico e vigoroso. Però la prossima volta che ci troviamo ci organizziamo per questo. Ci sono tanti musicisti in sala, quindi grazie a tutti, arrivederci.